So without further ado, let's get into it. So chat, welcome to Yakuza 5 review time. This, as I subtitled it, is the Great Haruka Idol Baseball Simulator, because those are really probably the parts that are really the most memorable, that stuck out the most. Let's see here. So, the good, from characters, you know, finally I felt like in this game, Daigo was a worthwhile character in some capacity. Daigo had like way more personality and way more going on in this game than probably like the past several Yakuza games since they first introduced him in Yakuza 2. So I would definitely say this is actually Daigo at his strongest ever since Yakuza 2. I think that's a pretty firm thing I could say, where he's just really the most interesting he's ever been, the strongest he's ever been too, because usually he's kind of like a weak character where he's like, oh no, and he like kind of like falls, kind of falls within like being taken advantage of by people and stuff. And here he's like a lot more on top of things for the most part. So it was actually really good to see Daigo like not suck. Haruka has real character development in this one. So I mean, I guess you could argue that Haruka has had like some development in both ever since probably 3. But she's always kind of been such a background character, you know, throughout the basically entirety of the series, going all the way back to the first game. Here, you know, she gets a huge amount of focus, with her basically having an entire section of the game devoted to her and Akiyama together, right? So it was actually kind of nice to actually have a lot more focus on Haruka. One thing I will say, though, is that even despite that, there's only so much development I think we really got out of her at the end of the day. I wouldn't say her development was particularly super strong compared to maybe some of the other characters, but we at least got something. And I'll take anything with Haruka at this point because of how long she's been in the series and how long she's been in the background. So that was still pretty good. So Watase and Katsuya, those were the two Omi captains, which in this particular slide are the two that are diagonal from each other on top left and bottom right. Were both, I felt, really entertaining, like kind of sub-boss enemies in this game. Both were pretty entertaining. Katsuya was entertaining in his own way because he was like the very kind of restrained type, and Watase is, of course, like positioned as his polar opposite, right? Kind of like a lot more like an outgoing, more direct sort of classic Yakuza enemy, right? Which is exactly what they were trying to position these characters as. But they were both, I think, a lot of fun. I thought a lot more memorable than maybe a lot of the other kind of, mid-tier antagonists in these past couple of games. So I'll give them a lot of credit. I think those two guys were actually a lot more fun to follow than a lot of the other ones recently, so that was pretty good. And then, generally saying that there's just like a lot of good side character development in general in this game, right? So I mean, Park was like actually a really strong character. She got like a lot of focus, a lot of development prior to being killed. And I will say one thing about her being killed was that it was very abrupt, and I don't think the game actually handled it that well. Sure, they kind of give you a couple of death flags here and there for her, but still could have been done better, at least I guess in that aspect. But she was still like a really strong character. Like, you really got to see like multiple dimensions of Park, of how she treats Haruka versus how she treats her employees versus how she treats like threats to her business and her dream and stuff, and what her own past was like and all this other shit. So I mean, like, just lots of like really good side character development that was really unexpected. Like Baba too. Like, despite the fact that Baba's kind of like a bit of a enigma in some ways, because his motivations are like a giant question mark half the time that you're around him. He still gets like a lot of development. So I mean, like, I don't know, but Baba I still thought was like a pretty neat character, despite not being the best of this group. But yeah, I mean, in general, the entire side character gamut really in this game was very strong. Probably stronger than it has been the past several Yakuza games. So I thought that was all really good. All right, the bad. So this is the part where we talk about how antagonists in Yakuza tend to not always be good either. So Morinaga and Aizawa are, I think, horribly written in this game. So if you recall, Morinaga and Aizawa are supposed to be, Daigo's bodyguards. Originally is how we meet them at the very beginning of the game, right? So they're supposed to be there to be his bodyguards. They lose track of him because, of course, Daigo runs away. And then Aoyama, we very quickly find out is bad or whatever. He's working, I guess, for the Omi at that point. Or he's trying to at least scheme with the Omi. And Morinaga and Aizawa still kind of look like they're like the good guys, like trying to find whatever. And then there's this whole kind of convoluted mess with them where Morinaga gets shot, but he's fine. He comes out, shoots Aoyama because he was working with Aoyama at some point. And then he says that he killed Aizawa because Aizawa was too loyal or whatever. And of course, that's all like a total lie. Aizawa was totally alive. He just basically just straight up lies to everybody at the end of the first chunk of the game, which is a bunch of BS. And then after that, in Kiryu's story, you like barely see them at all until the very end of the game, where they of course are shoehorned in at the very end, with Aizawa just being suddenly revealed to be Kurosawa's like bastard child or something like that, or secretly his son. And for whatever reason, he's supposed to like grab the Tojo clan from everybody else, but it's like really poorly like really all that's like really poorly explained, really poorly done because it's so shoehorned. And then there's something else in Morinaga that I honestly can't even remember, but like both characters are just like terrible scapegoat characters that, you know, like a fair amount of Yakuza villains are just kind of written to come in with this kind of Deus Ex Machina explanation for stuff in like the final hour of the game, right? So they're the poster child for that in this one, and unfortunately, I think they're both pretty terrible as a result of it. So anyway, enough of that. I don't need to sit here complaining about them all night. Saejima is, oh wow, I had a typo here. That's gonna bother me. I gotta correct that. Yep. Alright, so Saejima is just, like, too much of an idiot, even now. Even in going from a whole game to the next. I thought his entire scheme, honestly, at the beginning of his chapter, where he talks about he must go back to prison to, like, repent for something or another, was just, like, the stupidest thing ever. And really, it just felt like a terrible excuse of just, like, kind of typecasting Saejima in this universe as just being kind of like the bad boy prison dude or whatever, who's always in prison. His section of the game between all of the characters, all four major character arcs, is probably the worst, which it was in the last game, too, funny enough, right? His is probably the worst here, but funny enough, there's, like, good stuff in his. It's just that within his arc, only Baba is the one who shines, and he is really the one who has basically nothing going for him, right? So Saejima is just like an idiot, kind of, and boring as hell as usual. So not much else to say there to that. And then Takasugi, who was Shinada's debt collector. I know that like they kind of wrote him as being this like fan or whatever of Shinada for like the entire time that Shinada's kind of like down on his luck, for like that 15 or 20 year period or whatever. But it was really hard to take that. I felt at least very hard to look at that and be like, yes, that's absolutely believable that, he is this like stern debt collector, but he also just really loves him or whatever. I don't know. It's just like the whole thing felt so contrived to me. Like I had a really hard time just buying in on it. So I personally just didn't like that way that they wrote that particular character that much. It's funny though because I actually like Takasugi as a character in terms of his like personality, but I didn't like the way that they wrote that around the particular character development for Shinada, I guess. So, all right, so looking back at the story again, so they still, I think, have done a pretty good job with the protagonist juggle. So, they introduced that with 4. And then here in this game, you technically have 5 protagonists. And all 5 are playable. I mean, even though Haruka doesn't fight, she does technically do dance battles, and you can use her on the map in Sotenbori and stuff. So technically it is 5 playable protagonists. So, honestly, that all worked pretty well again. So I can't blame them for that. I mean, like, I think they did a pretty good job of that this time, especially because in this entry in Yakuza 5 versus Yakuza 4, I think they do a good job of making it so each character arc actually feels a lot more contained, or I should say, like self-contained. So like each one is like a cohesive story that also happens to play into the greater whole plot of the game, which that wasn't necessarily the case in 4. In 4, each character's story was not necessarily like, cohesive. It was really more like it was part of a greater whole and didn't really necessarily have a payoff to each one. It was just supposed to feed into each other. So here they actually managed, I think, to do both of those things pretty well. So each one is, cohesive and complete, and they also all feed into each other into the whole story. So I thought it was pretty good. I actually think they did a really good job with that in this one. Haruka's idle stuff adds a lot to the game, which, yes. Considering this is a game series that for a long time is just an endless brawler, where we can really kind of highly debate the quality of some of the brawling gameplay in this game. But, that's been the focus of how you, basically get through the gameplay loop, right? Is you go from point A to point B, fight a bunch of dudes along the way, get a cutscene, right? Having her idle stuff in here actually really changed it up a lot. So I personally found that to be a welcome change. They kind of have like a couple of different dance mini games for her, right? They kind of have like the dance battle thing, which is kind of like a weird DDR, and then the actual like idle performance dance game type, which is more like Osu, but like nerfed substantially, because it was literally it's like Osu, except like where you hit the buttons is fixed at a single point in the screen, which is really weird. But even despite kind of like that stuff, it was nice to have that change of pace, and actually made the game I personally feel flow a lot better. It's really kind of funny because when you look at some of people's opinions about this, there's actually a lot of people who are, I would say this is like whole bit with Haruka's idle stuff is actually very divisive. Like there's a lot of people who either just completely hate it or completely like it. I guess I'm in the camp that completely likes it. I can't imagine playing a whole game, especially this deep in the series at this point, where it's just straight up mindless brawling like for so much of it, right? So I don't know, I thought it was pretty additive. And then finally highlighting and a shout out to Kurosawa's meta commentary. So remember, Kurosawa was the Omi boss, right? He's really ultimately the big bad in this, being the Omi boss who ends up basically betraying his own captains with, Watase and Katsuya. The best thing about him really was all of his meta commentary about basically how stupid it is that all these Yakuza are just like talking about their loyalty and their like strength and all this other stuff, and how dumb he thinks that is, and how he actually thinks that's a weakness, which to me was like a huge comment on the overall series, right? How so many characters in this game series are so focused on like the honor of being a Yakuza and like blah blah blah, like all that sort of like kind of like internal like, you know, living by the code circle jerk sort of thing, right? And I thought that was great. I was like, damn, Kurosawa, I see you, man. You are so seen right now. It's not even funny. Like, I thought that was pretty great. I thought that was actually a wonderful way of highlighting kind of some of the, you know, kind of more stupid aspects of that loop that they kind of maintain here. So, all right. So the bad falls a bit apart towards the final act. So, funny story on this bullet point. That's exactly the same bullet point that's in the Yakuza 4 review. It's exactly true. The past several games, it has actually been the case since I think 3, 4, and 5 had all had the same problem, where they create a bunch of build-up and then have no idea how to finish it. So, I think 1 and 2 and 0 all finished pretty okay. But 3, 4, and 5 have had a pretty big bad habit of not knowing how to actually finish the game. Sticking the landing is not a strong point. Yeah, I know. It definitely isn't, especially these past few titles. They have had a very difficult time doing that. Oh yeah, and so this other part from the story, this quote that I put here for, we won't know who the big bad is unless we all fight. That was when you had Katsuya, Watase, Saejima, and Kiryu all fighting on the roof because Katsuya comes to the conclusion of, oh, somebody's orchestrating this, but we just have to, or somebody's orchestrating this, and that person just wants us to all fight each other, but we have no idea who it is, so the only way we'll be able to figure out who it is if we just go along with what they do. So they just, like, you know, get up there and beat the living shit out of each other on that roof, and I just thought that was one of the dumbest fucking things. It, like, out of, like, there have been, like, many stupid moments in this game series from a plot perspective. That was, like, kind of, like, highlighted to me, like, as one of the stupidest things that anybody has said in these games. And one of the dumbest conclusions they could come to. And they're like, oh, man, I really got to get a piece of Kiryu. This is my chance. And I'm just like, come on, man. Like, why? It's super, super stupid. I will say that's probably still not as dumb as some of the rubber bullet excuses from Yakuza 4, because those are pretty stupid. But it was still pretty dumb. It was still pretty stupid. Let's see. Aizawa fighting Kiryu for the Tojo is a real shoehorn. That really falls in more with the first bit. So as you can tell, really, it's pretty much everything that was bad about this game's story is, of course, towards the end, once again, right? These games just don't know... They don't know how to bring it all together sometimes. Unfortunately, that's been too common for the past couple of entries. Alright, mini-games galore. So this game was popping with stuff to do. Like, really, this game was just bursting at the seams with stuff to do. So, you know... You had all the traditional stuff with bowling, golf, and batting center, except technically the batting center was deluxe for Shinada. And, you know, every pro tag had their own minigame, which is crazy. Their own dedicated minigame, which is definitely something they've never done prior to this point. You know, with Kiryu with taxi driving, Saejima with his hunting minigame, which I personally wasn't really that much into, but it's neat that I was there. Haruka's, of course, is technically the third one because Akiyama doesn't really have his own, but Akiyama and Haruka share the same arc. So technically hers is that minigame. And then you have Shinada's more complicated baseball one, which is like a lot more involved that we only scratched the surface of. So, and then within Haruka's, she technically has like 5 or 6 different, no, more than that, like 6, maybe even 7 different mini games in Haruka's, because her whole thing is like, her whole mini game is like a Wii Sports of mini games. Because she's got like, you know, like the all the idle stuff for like shaking people's hands, getting on game shows, doing random other stuff like running in the streets, like what? Dance battles, idol battles, like the list goes on, right? There's like tons of shit that you could do in Haruka. So tons and tons of mini games in this one, which is great fun because I found that as some really kind of here hitting their stride of realizing like where their greatest strengths are, which is great because this is what I think people want out of Yakuza, right? Taiko Drum Master being this game was actually a huge surprise. I had no idea that it was going to be in here. I knew that there was probably going to be Virtua Fighter again, which there was, and then there was, I think, some other smaller minigame that kind of sucked from the arcades too. But Taiko Drum Master was a big surprise, so being able to play, even though it was only like I think 4 or 5 songs, and Taiko Drum Master is pretty sweet. We also had a lot of karaoke music in this one, so lots and lots of good variety in karaoke. And in this one, you know, we had Bakami Tai, which, you know, automatic plus. So yeah, I mean, there was like a lot to do in this game. Like, if we really wanted to get deep into it here with all the different mini games, you could stay on this game for dozens of hours easily. Like, I can't even imagine what it would take to like really you know, quote, beat every mini game in this. It would be a huge effort, but it's still pretty cool. All right, so combat was not bad in this one. It really is just a modified version of Yakuza 4's. It's like a small evolution of that one. The skill and tech upgrades did tend to be overall better. So I would say that as a whole, it was more worthwhile to like level your character up and like choose different techniques and stuff from like the menus, the upgrade menus in here in Yakuza 5. Good combat variety. Akiyama's was great, and actually even better this time because he had stuff like air juggling, which is like really crazy to think about, but he did. And Shinada's was also, I think Shinada was also pretty fun to play. And Shinada has a pretty strong focus on using weapons too, which is, I always think is good. Like, the more weapons you can put in Yakuza, the better, because you don't want to sit here using the same like 4-punch combos all the time. There's still a couple of bullshit bosses from what I remember. There were. It's really irritating ones. But overall, better in terms of even that too. None of like the really big key fights were really that bad. A couple of smaller ones were a lot more annoying, funny enough, but overall, you know, actually not a bad situation on the boss front. Like, it was really pretty fine. I was okay with it. Alright, so this one, we're saying in conclusion, is going to be a 7 out of 10. Again, that's what we gave Yakuza 4. And I guess the reasoning here was, you know, we have the better version of the multiple protagonist strategy here, which is an actual evolution. I do feel it's an actual evolution over what they had in 4. It's just an overall better version of it, since you have all the self-complete stories. You know, the self-complete stories per character also melding in with the overall scope of the entire game. Huge number of maps. Like, we didn't talk about this yet up to this point in this review, but huge number of game maps. That's a huge plus, right? Because most of these games up to this point have only had up to 2 maps in the game. But in this game, we had 5 city maps, which is, you know, does not actually sound like that much, but from the scope of these games, that's like bananas. Because, you know, usually it's just been like, usually just like Sotenbori and Kamurocho, right? In several of the games, it's been like that. But in this one, you know, we had, oh gosh, what's it called? I can't remember. There's Nakasugai, Sotenbori, Kamurocho, and several, the couple other ones too. I can't immediately remember the name of. But that was pretty great. It was nice to actually have other locales to explore after having, you know, 5 straight games of Kamurocho, and probably at least half of those games of also Sotenbori. You know, we only ever had Okinawa in Yakuza 3. Could have kind of wish we also had that here too, but it's fine. I mean, we got a bunch of new locales, and that did make it overall worth it, I think. So having all those extra maps actually helped a lot for variety. Tighter character arcs, we already talked about that a bit. We talked about some more streamline. Yeah, I mean, the game was overall pretty good. So for this one, because it's actually less obvious where this ranks, despite there being some kind of stupid stuff. I mean, there's like a lot of stupid stuff in some of the plot lines for these games. But the game, like, even if you actually ignore some of that stuff, the game is actually insanely solid. So, you know, as an overall, like, balance of enjoyment, I would actually say that this is probably slightly above 4. So I would actually say this is actually the second best Yakuza game we've played so far, among everything. That one is probably, like, if you really probably try to ask me, depending on which day, I could probably swap 5 and 4, depending on my mood. But I definitely think overall 5 is just, like, more solid, like a more solid version of 4, like a more evolved version of 4. 4 is already pretty good, so yeah, I mean, that's basically it. So, you know, our order now is 054213, which I feel is pretty accurate. I don't think I would change much besides maybe swap 4 with 5 on a given day if I was, like, really feeling it for whatever reason. But I don't know. I think 5 being above 4 is actually a pretty solid idea overall. So it's all right. What do you think, chat? Do you think this is pretty fair? You think 5 is overall a better game than 4? That's overall what I think. There's just a lot to do in this game. It's really, truly a huge game. It's by far the biggest Yakuza game.